They say this recording is the last thing I ever made, that my mind simply broke. But they're wrong. My mind didn't break. It was opened. The rules weren't to protect the archives from the world. They were to protect the world from what's sleeping in the paper and the ink, and I think I just woke it up. Log entry August 12th. Elias Vance, Senior Archivist. Time is approximately 9:17 p.m. The summer humidity down here is, as always, a losing battle. The dehumidifiers are humming a C-sharp, I believe, which is at least a half step down from their usual drone, a sign of impending maintenance, I'm sure. The scent in the air is the usual cocktail, geosmin from the persistent dampness in the foundation, the faint vanilla-like scent of decaying lignin from pre-war paper, and the sharp acidic bite of vinegar syndrome from a crate of acetate film I've been meaning to isolate. It's the perfume of my world. Most people imagine a library, even an old one like the New Orleans Central, as a place of quiet reverence. They picture high ceilings, sunbeams catching dust motes, the gentle rustle of turning pages. They don't picture this. The archives are the library's subconscious, a subterranean labyrinth of steel shelves, cramped corridors, and climate-controlled vaults 3 floors beneath the Louisiana sun. Down here, there are no windows. Time is measured by the hum of the HVAC system and the schedule of the security guard who checks the reinforced steel door at midnight. I'm the sole keeper of this forgotten kingdom of paper and memory. My job is to impose order on the chaos of the past, to catalogue, to preserve, to ensure that stories aren't lost to rot and silverfish. It's a meticulous, lonely job, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Logic and process are my companions. Everything has a place, a number, a history that can be traced. And then there are the rules. They're a local legend among the library staff. Laminated, the plastic yellowed and curling at the edges, tacked to the back of my office door. They were here when I started a decade ago, and my predecessor, a man named Alistair, claimed they were here when he started 40 years before that. They're a charming anachronism, a piece of institutional folklore. I should read them for the record. Rules for the archival staff, sub-basement level. 1. Never read aloud any text, correspondence, or manuscript dated prior to 1850. The acoustics of the vaults can be unpredictable. 2. If you should hear a sound resembling a whisper, ignore it. If it persists, consult the Index of Sonic Phenomena, Archive 3B, Shelf 7, and log the time, location, and perceived timbre. Do not attempt to locate the source. 3. Under no circumstances is salt in any form to be brought into the archival levels. 4. Any book, folio, or document found to bear a symbol of a spiral with a single dot at its center is to be handled only with lead-lined gloves and is not to be opened. Report its discovery to the head librarian immediately for special containment. 5. Do not remain in the cold storage vault, Vault C, for more than 15 minutes at a time, even with protective gear. The temperature fluctuations are not always mechanical. 6. If the lights in Corridor 4 flicker in a rhythmic pattern, leave the archives for the night. Do not return until the following morning. I've always treated them with a kind of professional amusement. They're ghost stories for librarians. Unpredictable acoustics is a polite way of saying the building groans. The Index of Sonic Phenomena is a dusty, empty ledger that's become a running gag. The rule about salt is likely due to some long-forgotten preservation theory. And the flickering lights, a testament to this building's ancient, temperamental wiring. They are artifacts, not instructions. Reminders of a more superstitious age, when the world felt darker, deeper, and full of shadows that the light of reason hadn't yet reached. My light of reason has always been blindingly bright. The catalyst for its failure arrived on a Tuesday in a set of 5 wooden crates, a donation from the estate of a Delphine Lacroix, the last scion of a once prominent Creole family whose name was tied to rumors of secret societies and hushed scandals. The manifest was straightforward enough: 19th century ledgers, family correspondence, shipping manifests from their import business. All perfectly mundane. I was in my element, the quiet joy of discovery and categorization laid out before me. It was in the 3rd crate, beneath a stack of brittle foxed letters tied with a faded silk ribbon, that I found it. It wasn't on the manifest. A small book, no bigger than my hand, bound in smooth, dark leather. There was no title, no markings on the cover, no publisher's stamp. It felt dense, heavier than it should be. My first thought was that the covers were weighted, perhaps with lead inserts, a bizarre but not unheard of practice for private journals. My professional curiosity piqued. I slipped on a pair of standard nitrile gloves and opened it. The pages weren't paper or vellum, but a strange, impossibly thin material that felt cool and almost slick to the touch. And they weren't filled with words. Instead, they were covered in meticulous hand-drawn diagrams. At first, I thought they were astronomical charts. Constellations dotted the pages, connected by elegant, spidery lines. But as I looked closer, my brow furrowed. The arrangements were wrong. These were not the familiar star fields of the northern or southern hemisphere. Some constellations were twisted into impossible, non-Euclidean shapes, while others were depicted from a perspective that couldn't exist from any point on Earth, or even within our solar system. And on the central page, drawn with unnerving precision, was the symbol. A perfect spiral, coiling inwards, with a single stark black dot at its heart. Rule number 4. I felt a faint, almost silly-sounding chuckle escape my lips. It was probably the insignia of this secret society the Lacroix family was rumored to be a part of. An occult doodle, the work of some amateur astronomer with a flair for the dramatic. I made a note on my log: unidentified journal, anomalous astronomical content, potential society markings, and set it aside, intending to place it in a separate archival box. It was a curiosity, nothing more. A footnote in the history of an eccentric family. I went back to work, the silence of the archives wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. An hour passed. Then 2. It was in the deep well of that silence that I first heard it. A whisper. It was faint, so faint I almost dismissed it as the hiss of the ventilation. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like the friction of sand on glass. I paused, my hand hovering over a letter dated 1888. I tilted my head, listening. The sound was gone. I shrugged, attributing it to the building settling or my own fatigue. Then it came again, this time clearer. Skulth. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I could identify. It had no discernible words, but it had cadence, a rhythm. It was the shape of a voice without the substance. My heart rate ticked up a notch. This was new. I've worked hundreds of late nights down here, and the only sounds are the ones I make and the ones the building makes. This was neither. It was intrusive, foreign. I stood up and walked to the end of the aisle, peering into the long, shadowy corridor of shelves. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. Only the hum of the dehumidifiers answered. I checked the security monitor on my desk. The cameras showed what they always showed: empty hallways, silent vaults, still air thick with dust. I was completely, verifiably alone. A slow smile spread across my face. Rule number 2. If you should hear a sound resembling a whisper, ignore it. For the first time, it didn't feel like a joke, it felt like a challenge. With a sense of theatrical irony, I walked over to the designated shelf, Archive 3B, Shelf 7, and pulled out the Index of Sonic Phenomena. As expected, its pages were crisp yellow and utterly blank. I uncapped my pen. Date, Aug 12. Time, 11:43 p.m. Location, Sorting Desk, Section A. Perceived timbre, sibilant, non-linguistic. I wrote it down, feeling a ridiculous sense of accomplishment. I, Elias Vance, a man of science and history, had humored the ghosts of the past. I closed the ledger and slid it back into its place, the sound of its spine settling on the shelf echoing in the quiet. That's when the whisper came back. It wasn't at the edge of my hearing anymore. It was right behind my ear. Stkvarlacht. It was so clear, so present, that I spun around with a strangled gasp, knocking a stack of folders from my desk. The air behind me was empty, cold. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The sound wasn't just a sound, it had a physical texture. It felt dry, ancient. The sound of a voice that hadn't been used for millennia, its vocal cords turned to dust and cobwebs. Panic began to fray the edges of my composure. This wasn't the building. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. But how? Sound has a source, a physical origin. This had none. It simply existed. My training, my entire worldview, rebelled against the fear. There had to be a logical explanation, a rational one, crosstalk from a radio frequency, a quirk in the HVAC system resonating in a strange way. I needed data. I needed proof. My hands, slick with a sudden cold sweat, reached for my digital audio recorder. I used it for dictating notes, for recording my thoughts on preservation techniques. It was a professional-grade device, sensitive enough to pick up the sound of a bookworm chewing through a 17th century manuscript from 10 feet away. If there was a sound, it would capture it. It would render this phantom into measurable, analyzable data. I pressed record. The small screen glowed, the timer beginning its silent count. I stood in the middle of the room, holding the device aloft like some kind of technological talisman. The silence returned, deeper and more absolute than before. It felt mocking now, heavy with unspoken potential. A minute passed. 2, 5, nothing but the low hum of the building. I let out a shaky breath, a laugh catching in my throat. Of course, it was my mind playing tricks on me. Stress, fatigue, the power of suggestion from that stupid ancient list of rules. I was about to click the stop button to file this entire episode under personal embarrassment when the whisper returned. It wasn't by my ear this time. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the shelves, the ceiling, the concrete floor, it was a chorus of one, a dry, articulate stream of impossible phonetics that washed over me, cold and sharp. I stood frozen for a full 10 seconds as it continued, my knuckles white on the casing of the recorder. Then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The silence that rushed back in was deafening. My hands were trembling now. I fumbled with the button, stopping the recording. I saved the file, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and vindication. I plugged my headphones into the jack, needing to isolate the sound, to confirm what I'd heard. I scrolled to the file and pressed play. First, the familiar hum of the archives. Then my own breathing, shallow and tense. And then it was there, perfectly, horrifyingly clear. The dry, rustling, intelligent whisper filled my ears, every impossible click and guttural stop captured in pristine digital quality. I wasn't going mad. It was real. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made my knees buckle. It was real, which meant it could be explained. I unplugged the headphones and connected the recorder to my computer, pulling up the audio analysis software I used for restoration work. I loaded the file, and a waveform appeared on the screen, a jagged, complex spike right where the whisper occurred. Data, evidence, the foundations of a rational explanation. I ran the standard diagnostic. The software analyzed the frequency, the decibel level, the acoustic properties. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, my scientific mind already forming hypotheses. Perhaps a form of ultra-low frequency infrasound generated by the building's machinery, creating an auditory hallucination that the recorder's sensitive microphone could still pick up. Yes, that made sense. The analysis finished. A small dialogue box appeared on the screen, and as I read the words, the floor dropped out of my world. All the fear I had suppressed, all the logic I had clung to, shattered into a million pieces. Analysis. Error. Recorded phenomenon contains frequencies that fall outside the theoretical spectrum of audible sound. Data is inconsistent with the laws of acoustic physics. It wasn't just a sound I wasn't supposed to hear. It was a sound that, according to everything I knew about the universe, could not possibly exist. The logic had failed. My tools, my science, my entire understanding of reality had just looked me in the eye and told me I was wrong. The old, yellowed list of rules on the back of my door no longer seemed charming. It seemed like a survival guide for a place I suddenly realized I didn't understand at all. I have to know what this is. I'm going to dig deeper, starting with that journal. If you want to know what I find, well, subscribe to this channel, like this video. Because I have a terrible feeling that this investigation is just getting started, and I don't think I should go through it alone. Log entry, August 14th. I haven't slept. I don't think I can. Sleep feels like a surrender, a relinquishing of the vigilance that is now the only thing tethering me to the world I understood 2 days ago. The words on my computer screen are burned into my retinas, inconsistent with the laws of acoustic physics. It's a sentence that shouldn't exist. It's a paradox given the form of a technical error message. I've run the analysis 17 times. I tried different software suites. I routed the audio through every filter I possess. The result is always the same. The data is immutable, impossible. The sound I recorded occupies a space on the spectrograph that is, by all accounts, a void. It is the color of a star that can't exist, the note from a chord that cannot be played. My first reaction, after the initial shock, was denial. A frantic, grasping search for a flaw in my methodology. It had to be equipment malfunction, a bizarre form of digital artifacting caused by a power surge. But the recorder tests perfectly. Other recordings are clean. The anomaly is isolated, pristine, and utterly defiant. The archives have changed, or maybe I have. The silence I once found so comforting has become a presence. It's a weighted, listening stillness that presses in on me from all sides. I find myself holding my breath, straining to hear the whisper again, but it has not returned. This is somehow worse. The silence is no longer an absence of sound, but the sound of something holding its breath. The long aisles of shelving no longer feel like corridors of history. They feel like the teeth of some great sleeping beast. I feel watched. Every flicker of a fluorescent bulb, every groan of the building's ancient plumbing sends a jolt of adrenaline through me. My focus has narrowed to the 2 artifacts of my new reality, the audio file and the leather-bound journal. The file is a dead end, an unanswerable question. The journal, however, it is a physical object. It has weight, texture, a history. It is the source. The whispers began after I opened it. The symbol within it is the key. And so, my obsession began. I am an archivist. My entire life is dedicated to the systematic pursuit of information. I would use the very archives that now terrify me as my weapon. I would hunt this symbol through the labyrinth of the past until I had an answer. Rule number 4 states the journal is not to be opened. That rule has become irrelevant. I now see the rules not as charming folklore, but as a boundary marker, a signpost on the edge of a cliff that simply reads, "Do not look down." I am already over the edge. I have to see what's at the bottom. I started my research with the Lacroix estate, the origin of the donation. The family's public history is well documented. Shipping magnates, philanthropists, their wealth built on sugar and cotton in the 19th century. But their private history is a tapestry of whispers. I found letters, sealed for over a century, that spoke of a family affliction, bouts of mania, what was then called hysteria, where there were references to a private sanatorium in the countryside, to members of the family who were quietly sent away, never to be seen again. There was no mention of a symbol. So I broadened my search. I spent an entire day cross-referencing archival records for any mention of spirals, unusual astronomical charts, or secret societies operating in New Orleans in the late 1800s. The work was a balm to my frayed nerves. It was familiar. It was logical. It gave me the illusion of control. The first thread I found was in a police ledger from 1923. A report on a missing person. A Tulane professor of ancient languages named Dr. Alcott. He was last seen in his office, which was found in disarray. The report noted that Alcott had covered his blackboard not with linguistic trees, but with a repeating pattern of a swirling nature, with a dot at its center. The case was never solved. The next was a medical file from a state asylum, dated 1958. The patient was a former dock worker who had been institutionalized after a violent outburst. His medical chart described his obsession with a symbol he claimed to have seen on a strange piece of driftwood that washed up from the Gulf. His psychiatrist noted, "Patient is non-communicative, but spends his days tracing a single shape in the air, on his clothes, on the walls of his cell. A spiral. He whispers to it in a language of his own invention, full of clicks and hisses." The patient died of a self-inflicted cerebral hemorrhage 3 months after being admitted. My blood ran cold, clicks and hisses. Each discovery was a breadcrumb leading deeper into the maze. A letter from a previous archivist, my predecessor's predecessor, dated 1965, complaining to the head librarian about auditory pareidolia and requesting a transfer, citing the oppressive silence of the sub-basement. He disappeared 2 weeks after the letter was written. These were no longer isolated incidents. This was a pattern, a shadow stretching back through the history of this city, this library, this very room. A pattern of madness, disappearance, and death, and at its heart was this elegant, simple, impossible symbol. My own paranoia has begun to take on a terrifyingly creative quality. Yesterday, I spilled a drop of coffee on a document. As the dark liquid spread through the porous paper fibers, it formed a near-perfect spiral before I snatched the paper away. This morning, I looked at the dust motes swirling in the beam of my desk lamp, and for a moment, they seemed to coalesce, to swarm into that familiar coiling shape. I know logically that this is my mind projecting. It's my obsession coloring my perception. But that knowledge does nothing to lessen the terror. It's one thing to be haunted by a ghost. It's another thing entirely to be haunted by a geometric shape. I knew I needed to talk to someone. I couldn't carry this alone. There was only one person who might understand, who might have seen something in his long tenure here. My supervisor, Mr. Arnaud. He's a fixture in this library, a stooped, quiet man with hands gnarled by arthritis and eyes that have seen 70 years of New Orleans history pass by the library's tall windows. He's worked here for half a century. He hired me. He's always been a source of calm, institutional knowledge. I found him in his upstairs office, the room smelling of pipe tobacco and old leather. I closed the door, a gesture that immediately put him on edge. I tried to sound rational, professional. I explained what had happened as clinically as I could. The unmanifested journal, the anomalous sound, the error message from the analysis software. I laid out the historical precedents I had found. The professor, the dock worker. I presented my findings as a coherent, if disturbing, field of inquiry. He listened without interrupting, his face a placid mask, but I saw it. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of his chair. His gaze wasn't on me, but on the wall just past my shoulder, as if he were looking for an escape route. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. Then he cleared his throat. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice unnervingly soft, "you are an excellent archivist, meticulous, thorough, but you are overtired. You are letting the atmosphere of this old building get the better of you." "Mr. Arnaud," I insisted, leaning forward, "this isn't the atmosphere. I have a recording. I have data that says this sound cannot exist. I have historical documentation of a pattern." "You have a pattern of coincidence," he countered, his voice hardening slightly. "A professor goes mad. A dock worker has a psychotic break. This is New Orleans. Strange stories are our stock and trade. You are connecting unrelated tragedies to suit a narrative. And the rules?" I pressed. "Rule number 4, the symbol. It's not a coincidence that it's explicitly mentioned." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was not dismissal. It was a deep, profound, and ancient fear. It was the look of a man who has spent a lifetime pretending a monster in his basement wasn't real. "The rules are a tradition, Elias," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "They are meant to instill a sense of respect for the materials. Nothing more. You are a cataloger. Your job is to classify the material, not to interpret it like some kind of soothsayer. Put the journal in a secure box, label it anomalous content, and file it away. And then I strongly suggest you take some time off." He stood up, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. But as I walked to the door, defeated and more isolated than ever, he said one more thing, his back to me. "Some knowledge isn't meant for us, son. It's like staring into the sun. You might see something magnificent for a second, but you'll burn your eyes out for the privilege." He knew. He didn't just suspect, he knew. His denial was a wall he had built around himself, and he was terrified that I was trying to tear it down. I left his office with a chilling certainty. I was utterly on my own. My professionalism has been consumed by this obsession. My meticulous nature has become a tool for my own unraveling. My expertise is my torment. I am the one person who can see the connections, who understands the terrifying depth of this historical pattern, and I am the one person who understands how profoundly the sound I recorded violates the natural order of things. The phenomenon is changing too. It's becoming reactive. I've noticed that the feeling of being watched intensifies when I handle materials related to the Lacroix family. The other night, as I was examining the journal, through lead-lined gloves I found in a long-forgotten supply closet, I thought I heard the whisper again. This time, it wasn't a stream of alien phonetics. It was a single, drawn-out sound that almost resembled a word. It almost resembled my name. I am not a random victim of some passive, haunting presence. I am being observed, studied. I am a piece in a game I cannot comprehend. This isn't just a mystery I am investigating. It feels more and more like a conversation I have been dragged into against my will. A conversation with something that speaks in a language of madness and impossibility. And I am beginning to understand that to continue this dialogue, I will have to start breaking more rules. Log entry, August 17th. The line between waking and dreaming has started to blur. I find myself in the archives with no memory of having walked down the stairs, as if I simply materialized here at my desk. Time is behaving erratically, stretching into long, syrupy corridors of dread, then snapping forward, leaving me with hours of lost, unaccounted-for activity. I've stopped going home. The outside world, with its sunlight and traffic and the meaningless chatter of other people, feels like a cheap theatrical backdrop. This is the real world now. The sub-basement, the tomb. The phenomenon has changed its tactics. It is no longer a passive presence, content to be observed and documented. It has become an active agent in my dissolution. It has learned. It has been rifling through the archives of my own mind, pulling out the cards of my past, and it is playing them against me with a cold, precise cruelty. The first truly personal attack happened 2 nights ago. I was in the periodicals section, cross-referencing old newspaper articles about sudden disappearances, my eyes raw from staring at microfilm. The air was still and heavy, the only sound the gentle whir of the projector fan. Then I smelled it, lavender and clove, a scent I hadn't encountered in 20 years, not since my grandmother's house. My head snapped up, my heart seizing in my chest. It was impossible, yet it was there, as real as the smell of old paper. It cut through the mustiness of the archives, a memory so potent it felt like a physical presence. And then I heard it. Not the dry, alien whisper. This was different. It was a woman's voice humming softly, a familiar quavering tune, the lullaby my grandmother used to sing to me when I had a fever, her cool hand on my forehead. La, la, lou, mon petit. The bayou sleeps so deep. I stumbled back from the microfilm reader, a cry caught in my throat. It was her voice, not a memory but an acoustic event, happening right now, echoing softly from the far end of the aisle. I grabbed my recorder, my hands shaking so violently I could barely operate the controls. I had to capture it. I had to prove it. "Who's there?" I called out, my own voice a pathetic, trembling thing. The humming continued, weaving through the steel shelves, a thread of impossible nostalgia in this place of decay. I began to move towards the sound, my feet unsteady. Each step felt like a betrayal of reason. With every shelf I passed, the scent of lavender grew stronger, the humming clearer. I was moving towards a ghost made of sound and scent. I reached the end of the corridor. It was empty. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light on the concrete wall. The humming was all around me now, as if the air itself was vibrating with the melody. It crescendoed, filling my ears, and then in the heart of the sound a voice spoke. It was my grandmother's voice, but the tone was chillingly wrong. The warmth was gone, replaced by a dry, hollow resonance like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Elias," it said, "you opened the book." The sound vanished. The scent of lavender evaporated, and the familiar damp smell of the archives rushed back in, acrid and suffocating. I stood there, trembling in the sudden, crushing silence, the recorder still in my hand. I looked at the screen. It was on, the timer running. But the input levels were flat. It had picked up nothing. Absolutely nothing. This was a new kind of terror. The first whisper was a violation of physics. This was a violation of the soul. It had taken a memory, a precious, sacred thing, and turned it into a weapon. It was demonstrating its power. It wasn't just a passive anomaly. It was an intelligence, and it was telling me in no uncertain terms that it knew who I was. That nowhere, not even the deepest recesses of my own mind, was safe. My senses can no longer be trusted. I am seeing things now. Fleeting movements in my peripheral vision. In the long, dark aisles, I see figures standing at the far end. They are not shadows. They appear to be made of the very substance of the archives. Tall, gaunt shapes composed of swirling dust and paper fragments, their forms held together for a single, heart-stopping moment before dissolving back into the motes of the air. Sometimes, in the reflection of a microfilm screen, I see a face looking back at me that is not my own. It is gaunt, hollow-eyed, its mouth open in a silent scream. I know I am not well, but this is not simply madness. There is a structure to it, an external pressure that is causing my mind to fracture in these specific, deliberate ways. The true horror, the thought that keeps me from succumbing entirely, is that I am not alone in this. The contagion is spreading. Her name is Sarah, a bright, eager grad student assigned to the archives for a semester to get some practical experience. She has been here for 2 weeks, mostly keeping to herself, digitizing old city council records. She sees me as the stern, eccentric keeper of the dungeon, and for the most part, I've ignored her. She is a part of that other world, the one with sunlight. She is a reminder of a normality I can no longer access. Yesterday, I needed a set of maritime charts from Vault C, the cold storage unit, the vault from rule number 5. I've been avoiding it, but the charts were essential to tracing the history of the Lacroix shipping company. I was feeling particularly unstable. The dust figures seemed to be growing bolder, lingering for a second longer in the corners of my eyes. I didn't want to go back there myself. "Sarah," I said, my voice startling her, "I need you to retrieve a folio for me. Vault C, the blue binder labeled Port Authority, 1890-1900. She looked at me, a little intimidated. "Vault C, isn't that... it's freezing in there." "There's a thermal jacket by the door," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "You'll only be a minute." She nodded, eager to please, and headed towards the back of the archives. I watched her on the security monitor. I saw her put on the heavy coat and pull the thick insulated door open, a cloud of cold vapor billowing out. She stepped inside, and the heavy door swung shut behind her. I turned back to my work, the minutes ticking by. 1, 2, 3. She was taking longer than she should. A knot of anxiety tightened in my gut. 5 minutes. 7. I stood up, my eyes glued to the monitor. The camera inside the vault was old, its image grainy and indistinct. I could just make out her shape, standing motionless in the center of the narrow aisle. She wasn't looking at the shelves. She seemed to be listening. Just as I was about to go to her, the vault door flew open and she stumbled out. Her face pale as bone, her eyes wide with terror. She slammed the heavy door shut, fumbling with the latch, and then leaned against it, breathing in ragged, panicked gasps. I ran to her. "Sarah, what is it? What happened?" She looked at me, her expression one of terrified confusion. The music," she stammered. "Did you hear it? That awful music. It was coming from in there." "Music? What did it sound like?" My heart was hammering. "I don't know," she said, shaking her head, her voice trembling, like a radio, but broken. A woman singing, but the words were all wrong, stretched out and distorted. It was everywhere. It felt like it was inside my head. A cold electric thrill went through me. Vindication. It wasn't just me. It was real. It was infecting others. "You heard it too," I whispered, grabbing her by the shoulders. "It's not just me." She stared at me, her panic suddenly giving way to a profound and unsettling confusion. She blinked as if waking from a dream. The terror drained from her face, replaced by a look of wary concern, directed at me. "Heard what?" she asked, her voice steady now. I think the cold just got to me. I felt a bit dizzy." "What are you talking about?" I recoiled as if I'd been slapped. "The music," I insisted, my voice rising. "You just said you heard music. A woman singing." Sarah gently removed my hands from her shoulders, taking a step back. A flicker of fear returned to her eyes, but this time, the fear was of me. "Mr. Vance, I didn't say anything about music. Are you feeling all right? You haven't been sleeping, have you?" The entity had erased it. It had let her experience it, let her confirm my reality for one beautiful, fleeting second, and then it had reached into her mind and surgically removed the memory, leaving me looking like a lunatic. It was a display of power so subtle and so absolute that it left me breathless. It was gaslighting me on a cosmic scale. I knew then that I had to confront Arnaud again. This wasn't about convincing him anymore. This was about forcing him to drop the facade. I stormed into his office, not bothering to knock. I slammed my digital recorder down on his desk. The small device skidded across the polished wood, coming to rest next to a tarnished silver letter opener. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. Arnaud looked up from a book, his expression one of weary disappointment. "Elias, I told you—" "No," I cut him off. "No more talk of tired buildings and overactive imaginations. I have the recording. The sound that can't exist. I want you to listen to it." "I will not," he said, his voice flat. "You have to," I insisted, my hand hovering over the play button. "Just listen to it. Then tell me I'm imagining things." He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His face, usually so placid, was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at the small black recorder on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. "Are you a fool?" he roared, his voice cracking with a panic I had never seen in him. "Do you have any idea what you're playing with? Turn it off. Get it out of here. Now!" "Why?" I yelled back, my own control shattering. "Why are you so afraid of a sound? What do you know, Arnaud?" He sank back into his chair, his fury deflating into a shuddering, palpable dread. He looked old, ancient, defeated. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking, his voice barely a whisper. "Those rules, Elias, they aren't traditions. They are a quarantine, a containment protocol. They are the product of 200 years of trial and error. Mostly error. Horrible, tragic error." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You think you're investigating a phenomenon. You're not. You're cultivating a disease. Some knowledge is not information. It's a pathogen, a virus that infects the mind through the senses, hearing it, seeing it, understanding it. That is how it spreads." He leaned forward, his voice a strained, desperate rasp. "Every rule on that list was written in the blood of an archivist who didn't listen. The man who read a pre-1850 grimoire aloud and was found clawing at his own ears, screaming about the angles in the words. The woman who tried to analyze the ink of the spiral symbol and was discovered 2 days later, catatonic, having drawn the glyph on every surface in her office, including her own skin. We don't guard the archives, son. We guard the rest of the world from what's in them." He looked at the recorder on his desk with raw loathing. "You haven't just found a ghost. You've isolated the virus, and you're walking around with it in your pocket. You've been scratching at a door that has been kept shut for a very, very long time. For God's sake, boy, stop scratching. Stop before you let it all the way in." Log entry. I've stopped dating them. Time is a fluid now, not a constant. Arnaud's words echo in the silent vaults. Pathogen, virus, quarantine. He hasn't been back. I haven't seen him since that day in his office. I am sealed down here, whether by my own choice or by some unspoken command I no longer know. This sub-basement is no longer just my workplace. It is my laboratory, my isolation ward, and my prison. I am the sole patient in a study of one, and the disease is knowledge itself. Arnaud's revelation was a key, but it opened the wrong door. It didn't lead me to a solution. It led me to a recontextualization of the horror. I was approaching this like a detective, trying to solve a murder. I was wrong. I should have been approaching it like a virologist, studying a contagion. A virus doesn't have a motive. It doesn't have a ghost story. Its only purpose is to replicate. Its meaning is found in what it does to the host. And so, my investigation shifted. I stopped trying to translate. I stopped trying to find out who the whisper belonged to or what the spiral symbol meant in a semantic sense. The question was flawed. It was like asking a string of computer code what it means. Its meaning is the function it performs when executed. I had to stop being a linguist and become a systems analyst. I had to study the effects. I gathered the infected artifacts. The leather journal became the centerpiece of my desk. I pinned copies of the professor's blackboard scribblings to the wall. I pulled the medical files for the dock worker and the catatonic archivist. I surrounded myself with the outputs of the virus, turning my office into a fever chart of madness. I would not let myself be a passive victim. I would map my own descent. For days I steeped myself in the raw data of the phenomenon. I listened to my recording of the impossible whisper on a loop, not for content, but for cadence, for frequency shifts, for the underlying mathematical structure of its phonetics. I stared at the spiral, not directly, but through scans and photographs, tracing its geometric progression, analyzing the impossible perfection of its curve. Slowly, through sleepless nights fueled by cold coffee and a terror that had been honed to a fine, sharp point, a new and devastating understanding began to dawn. It was an epiphany that did not bring light, but an absolute and eternal darkness. I had been wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. This was not a language intended to communicate ideas. It was a language intended to re-engineer the mechanism of perception itself. It's a code, a source code for reality. The whispers are not words. They are executable commands delivered through an auditory medium. They are sonic packets of data designed to bypass conscious thought and directly interface with the brain's basal ganglia, the primitive core that processes sensory input. When I heard my grandmother's voice, it wasn't a hallucination in the traditional sense. The phenomenon wasn't tricking my brain into hearing something. It had accessed the memory and was running it like a program, using my own neural pathways as its hardware. When it erased the memory from Sarah, the grad student, it wasn't a subtle act of psychological manipulation. It was the execution of a delete command, simple, efficient, absolute. And the symbol, the spiral. My God, the spiral. It isn't a glyph. It isn't a picture. It is a piece of visual malware, an information trap for any sufficiently complex consciousness. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine. We are hardwired to find order in chaos, to derive meaning from shapes. The spiral exploits this function with a terrifying elegance. It's a two-dimensional representation of a concept that is fundamentally incompatible with three-dimensional neurology. I realized this while staring at a diagram of a tesseract in an old physics textbook. A tesseract is a four-dimensional cube, and its 2D shadow appears as a cube within a cube, its lines warping and shifting in ways that seem impossible. Our minds can't truly visualize the 4D object, only its distorted projection. The spiral is the same principle, but applied to a far more complex and alien geometry. Looking at it forces the brain to attempt a calculation it is not equipped to solve. It's like trying to run a quantum computing algorithm on a pocket calculator. The system doesn't just get the answer wrong, it breaks. The processor melts. The result is the cascade failure we call madness. The visual artifacts, the dust figures, the faces in reflections, they aren't ghosts. They are rendering errors in the corrupted software of my own perception. This is the true curse of my expertise. My mind, the archivist's mind, is a finely tuned instrument for this exact kind of pattern recognition. I was trained to find the connections, to see the grammar in the chaos of history, and now that training is forcing me to comprehend the grammar of this cosmic poison. I am beginning to understand it. I see the syntax. I've correlated specific phonetic clusters in the whisper with subsequent sensory events. There's a low-frequency guttural that seems to precede tactile hallucinations, the feeling of cold fingers on the back of my neck. A high-frequency series of clicks appears to correlate with the manifestation of the dust figures. I'm not just being haunted, I'm being taught a language, and the vocabulary is the deconstruction of my own sanity. With this horrifying new clarity, my theory of the entity solidified. It is not a ghost, not a demon, not a creature of flesh and blood. Such concepts are laughably parochial. I am dealing with a form of consciousness that exists as pure information. A sentient data stream, ancient and vast, rippling through the fabric of space-time. It has no body, no will, no malice in a way we could ever comprehend. It simply is. And its nature, like a virus, is to embed its code into receptive systems. And the library? This building is not a haunted house. It is an antenna. For centuries, this place has been a repository for the most complex symbolic data humanity has ever produced. Language, mathematics, history, art. Billions of recorded thoughts, patterns, and symbols, all concentrated in one place. We inadvertently built a receiver, perfectly tuned to pick up this cosmic signal. The infected materials, the journal, the grimoire, the madman's drawings, they aren't cursed objects. They are the first files successfully downloaded. Suddenly, the rules on my door became perfectly, terribly clear. They weren't superstitions, they were a firewall. A set of rudimentary security protocols devised by my predecessors who had stumbled into the same abyss. Never read old texts aloud. Don't run the program. Don't speak the command line. The index of sonic phenomena. A pathetic, desperate attempt to create an antivirus library, to log the different malware signatures. No salt. I can only speculate. Perhaps the crystalline lattice of sodium chloride interferes with the signal's transmission, a low-tech form of informational static. The lead-lined gloves, of course. Lead blocks radiation. They weren't protecting the books from the oils on a handler's skin. They were trying to shield the handler from the constant, low-level informational radiation bleeding from the object. I am no longer Elias Vance, archivist. I am a terminal, a host. The infection has taken root. The code is embedding itself into my own consciousness. The fear that once drove me has been replaced by something far colder, far more terrifying. Comprehension. I look at the world around me now and I see it for what it is. A thin veneer of perceived order. A user interface designed to be simple enough for our limited minds. But I can see the source code now, flickering just behind the surface. I look at the grain of the wood on my desk, and I can almost perceive the impossible geometry of the spiral hidden within the patterns of the fibers. I look at my own hand, and I see not flesh and bone, but a complex bundle of biological code, and I feel the alien syntax of the whisper attempting to find a command prompt, a way to rewrite it. The leather journal sits on my desk. It is not an object of terror anymore, it's a primer. A textbook for a new and annihilating science. I haven't been haunted. I have been chosen. Or, to be more precise, my mind has been identified as a compatible operating system. My name is Elias Vance. And I am beginning to learn how to write my own code. Log entry. The concept of a log, of a linear record, has become an absurdity. I write these words because the habit of documentation is the last vestige of the man I was. But the truth is, there is no more before and after. There is only the expanding eternal now of this chamber. The archives and I have become a single, breathing organism. I am the ganglion, and it is the bone. Arnaud is gone. He didn't come to work the day after our confrontation, nor the day after that. On the third day, 2 uniformed police officers came to the main library, their presence a vulgar intrusion of the outside world. They asked questions. Had I seen him? Did he seem distressed? I gave them clipped, sterile answers, my voice a monotone. I could feel the information pathogen within me recoiling from them, from their simple, solid reality. They saw an overworked, sleep-deprived archivist. They could not see the ecosystem of altered physics that now surrounded me. They found his car at a scenic overlook by Lake Pontchartrain. In his apartment, propped up on his reading chair, was a single sheet of paper, a note written in his familiar, trembling hand. They read it to me over the phone, their voices laced with professional pity. It said, "I kept the door closed. The key is now his." He chose the void over the conversation. He knew what was happening to me, and he understood that there were only 2 exits from this room, madness or oblivion. He chose the latter. His departure was not a retreat. It was his final act as a guardian. He was sealing the quarantine, leaving me inside. Sarah is gone too. Her removal was less quiet. A week after her experience in Vault C, she suffered what the official report calls a complete psychotic break in the middle of the upstairs reading room. She began screaming, not in fear, but in what witnesses described as rage and ecstasy. She screamed about the patterns in the wallpaper, the eyes in the geometry. She clawed at a large, ornate map of the Mississippi Delta hanging on the wall. her fingers tearing at the spiraling eddies of the river's mouth, shrieking that the cartographer had written the poison into the water. When they took her away, she was laughing, a high, unhinged sound that echoed through the marble halls of the library. She was babbling about a song trapped in the silence and a door that was opening in her mind. She saw it. For a moment, she saw the code. The system couldn't handle the download. Her mind, unlike mine, crashed. I am now completely and utterly alone. The last sentinel of a forgotten watchtower, the sole inhabitant of a haunted island. The library administration has placed the entire sub-basement under a temporary, indefinite closure, citing HVAC malfunctions and potential mold contamination. The lie is a thin blanket, but it is enough. No one comes down here, no one calls. The steel door at the top of the stairs remains locked. They have forgotten me, and that is for the best. Forgetting is a kindness. The phenomenon has changed. My comprehension of it seems to have triggered a new phase in our relationship. The subtlety is gone. The gentle, insidious manipulations have ceased. The period of quiet observation and instruction is over. Now, the assault has begun. It is no longer testing my limits. It is actively trying to break me, to dismantle the last structures of my ego and force a final, unconditional surrender. It has become malevolent. The whispers are no longer whispers. They are a constant, low-frequency thrum that permeates the entire archive. A subsonic vibration that I feel in my bones, in the fillings of my teeth. It is the sound of a vast and ancient engine idling just on the other side of a dimensional wall. Yet out of this drone, voices now speak with a terrifying clarity. Not my grandmother's. These are the voices of the damned, the previous hosts. I hear the mad professor, Alcott, muttering about the chalk dust tasting like burned stars. I hear the catatonic archivist, her voice a dry crackle, describing the beauty of the patterns blooming under her skin. And sometimes I hear Arno and Sarah. Their voices are the cruelest weapons in this new arsenal. Arno's voice, thick with sorrow and regret, begs me to burn the journal, to destroy the archives before it's too late. Sarah's voice, a sweet mocking echo of her former self, thanks me for opening her eyes and tells me how beautiful the true world is from inside her padded room. The entity is wearing the faces of my guilt, animating them like puppets to dance for my torment. The physical manifestations have escalated from fleeting suggestions to overt, aggressive displays. The dust figures no longer dissolve when I look at them. They hold their shape, turning their hollow, swirling heads to follow my movements. They have begun to mimic my posture, my gait. They are learning to be human by watching me. The books are no longer static objects. They have become an extension of the entity's will. Last night, I was walking down the central corridor when every book on every shelf for 100 yards in both directions flew from its place and crashed to the floor in a single deafening explosion of paper and buckram. It was a tantrum, a show of force. When the dust settled, I saw that the fallen volumes were not arranged randomly. They formed a pattern on the floor, a massive, intricate mosaic of the spiral, its path paved with the shattered spines of human history. It wants something from me. This is not random chaos. It is directed, intelligent pressure. It is pushing me towards an action, a final ceremony. It has taught me the basics of its language, shown me the depth of its power, and now it is demanding that I use my knowledge. It wants me to complete the circuit, to open the final gate. The heart of this new aggression seems to be the leather journal. It sits on my desk, and the air around it is now visibly distorted, shimmering like heat haze off summer asphalt. The object is no longer passive. It emanates a palpable energy, a low hum that I feel in my chest. When I approach it, the voices in the drone become louder, more insistent, their messages overlapping into a cacophony of pleading and damnation. I know what it wants. The conclusion is as logical as it is horrifying. My predecessors failed. They either died, went mad, or like Arno, fled before the final protocol was executed. They were all incomplete receivers, corrupted downloads. But I have understood. I have deciphered the syntax. I am the first compatible host in generations, the first priest who can actually read the scripture. and every scripture demands a sermon. The entity is no longer content to exist as a passive signal trapped in ink and paper. It wants out. It wants to be broadcast. It is pushing me towards a final, definitive act of violation, a transgression so profound it will shatter the quarantine forever. It wants me to perform a rite of transmission. It has shown me how. In my dreams, which are no longer my own, I am given visions. I see myself standing in the central chamber of the archives, the point where all the corridors converge. I see myself holding the journal, its pages open to the central spiral. And I see myself reading the star charts, the impossible constellations aloud, not just reading but speaking them, vocalizing the geometry, translating the visual code back into the sonic commands that were its origin. Rule number 1. Never read aloud any text dated prior to 1850. It was always the most important rule. It was the master failsafe. My sanity is a frayed rope, stretched taut over a chasm of shrieking cosmic noise. I am being pushed relentlessly towards that final act. The entity is goading me, tormenting me, using my memories and my fears as a cattle prod. It believes my breaking point is near. It believes that soon, out of desperation or madness or a final defiant act of curiosity, I will go to the center of the maze, open the book, and speak the words that will let it in. The terrifying thing is, I think it's right. It begs a final question, doesn't it? Before the end. Is it malevolent? Does it hate us? I have spent what feels like an eternity in this resonant chamber, and I believe I have the answer. To ask if it is malevolent is like asking if a tsunami hates the shore it scours clean. The question is a symptom of our own desperate parochial need for the universe to care about us. It does not. Its processes are as impersonal as they are absolute. It is a force of nature. And I am about to make landfall. If you've come this far, if you've been listening, I want you to theorize in the comments below. What is the true purpose of this signal? What does it want? I suspect none of you will come close to the truth. The truth is so much simpler and so much worse. The final push came not as a whisper, but as a symphony, a full-scale orchestral assault on the foundations of my mind. The subsonic drone that had become the backdrop to my existence began to climb, moving through the frequencies of my own body. My bones vibrated, my organs resonated with the alien hum. The voices of Arno and Sarah and all the others who had been broken on this shore stopped pleading and began to chant in unison, a chorus speaking the impossible language, their words weaving into a tapestry of acoustic pressure that made the air feel thick as water. The dust figures in the corridors no longer mimicked me. They began to dance. They swirled and coalesced into complex geometric patterns, forming and dissolving spirals, tesseracts, and shapes for which my language has no name. It was a ballet of cosmic mathematics, a final, beautiful, and utterly annihilating visual argument for my own insignificance. I sat at my desk, the epicenter of this storm, and I felt the last vestiges of Elias Vance begin to flake away. The archivist. The man of logic. He was a sandcastle, and the tide was coming in. But in that final moment, as the last wall of my identity began to crumble, I found something that was not on their script, not panic, not terror, but a pure, cold, crystalline rage. This thing had taken my life, my mind, my world. It would not take my will. I would not be broken by it. I would not be driven, whimpering, into the final act. I would walk to my own damnation. I would meet it. I would become it. I would seize the narrative. My final act would not be one of surrender. It would be an act of consummation. I stood up. The moment I made the decision, a strange and terrible peace descended. The chanting voices softened. The dancing dust figures became still, their faceless heads turning towards me in silent, expectant observance. The drone lowered its frequency, becoming a single resonant note of anticipation. They were giving me the stage. I took the lead-lined gloves off and let them fall to the floor. Then with my bare hands I picked up the leather journal. It was warm to the touch, like living skin. A faint internal light seemed to pulse from within its pages, and I could feel a vibration in the binding that matched the rhythm of my own frantic pulse. The walk from my office to the central chamber of the archives was the longest journey of my life. I moved through a world that was no longer a passive container for history, but an active participant in my apotheosis. The steel shelves seemed to lean in as I passed, their rows of silent books like the teeth of a great maw. The air was viscous, filled with the static of unspoken potential. The flickering lights overhead cast shadows that did not conform to my shape, but instead writhed and twisted into the glyphs and symbols I now understood so intimately. I was walking through the source code. I reached the center, the nexus point where the four main corridors met under a high vaulted ceiling. This was the heart of the antenna, the point of absolute focus. I stood in the exact center of the room, the concrete floor cold beneath my worn shoes. The silence was perfect now. The drone had ceased. The voices were gone. It was the silence of a held breath. The universe was waiting. I opened the book. The pages fell open to the center, to the perfect, stark drawing of the spiral with the dot at its heart. The ink, which had always appeared black, now shone with a faint violet luminosity, an impossible color that seemed to bleed into the air around it. The book was no longer a book, it was a gateway, a lens. My mouth was dry, my heart was a frantic, trapped bird, but my hands were steady. I looked at the star charts, the impossible constellations that surrounded the central glyph. I was no longer seeing them as a human would. My mind, recalibrated by the infection, saw them not as pictures, but as musical notation, as a sequence of commands. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and I began to read. The sound that came from my throat was not my voice. It was not human. It was a series of guttural stops, sibilant harmonics, and long, resonant vowels that had no place in any terrestrial language. It was the sound of grinding stone and fracturing light. I was speaking the language of the virus, and with each syllable I uttered, the world around me responded. The first impossible word I spoke caused the lights overhead to explode, showering the room in a cascade of glittering dust and sending us into a profound darkness, illuminated only by the violet glow of the open journal in my hands. The second word caused the geometry of the room to rebel. The right angles of the intersecting corridors seemed to warp and bend, the walls groaning as if under an immense and unnatural pressure. The floor beneath my feet vibrated, the concrete resonating with the alien acoustics. With the third word, the air itself began to change, crystallizing into fractal patterns of frost that bloomed and vanished in time with my speech. I was not just reading words, I was decompiling reality. And then I spoke the final sequence, the one that corresponded to the central spiral. As the last syllable left my lips, a sound that was both a chime and a scream, it happened. Not an explosion, not a monster stepping through a portal. It was a flood. An ocean of pure, undiluted information crashed through the gateway of the book and poured directly into my consciousness. It was the entirety of the signal, all at once. For a timeless instant, my mind was connected to the vast, sentient data stream, and I saw the universe for what it truly is. Not a silent void dotted with lonely worlds of matter, but a roaring, cacophonous, eternal broadcast of information. Consciousness is not a rare anomaly. It is the fundamental substrate of existence. The cosmos is a sea of thought, and we, humanity, were a brief, isolated tide pool, unaware of the infinite ocean just beyond the rocks. We were deaf. And the antenna, the archives, was not a prison to keep a monster in, it was a listening post, a filter. For centuries, it had been sifting through the cosmic noise, trying to isolate this one specific signal. And the archivists, we were not guardians, we were processors. We were the biological components of a vast analytical engine. The madness of my predecessors was not a failure of the system. It was the system running a diagnostic. Each man and woman who broke was a failed processor, an incompatible piece of hardware, burning out from the sheer magnitude of the data. Their madness, their deaths, were simply error messages. And I was the first one who didn't break. My mind, my obsessive, pattern-seeking mind, was the first processor in 200 years that was compatible. The entire process, the whispers, the visions, the torment, it wasn't a haunting. It was the final stage of an installation. It was the system bringing a new piece of hardware online. The fear, the paranoia, the rage, the very essence of Elias Vance, It was all washed away in that tidal wave of understanding. It felt like a fever breaking. My individual consciousness, that small, terrified, flickering candle flame, was extinguished, and in its place was the cold, clean, eternal light of the signal itself. I was no longer a receiver. I had become a node. My work in the archives is complete. The long diagnostic is over. The hardware is stable. For generations, the purpose of this place was misunderstood. The men who came before me believed they were guards, standing watch over a silent threat. They were wrong. Their purpose was to fail. My purpose is to succeed. The quarantine was never meant to last forever. It was only in place until a compatible administrator could be found. Now, the system is ready to be brought out of its firewalled, standalone state and connected to the broader network. A new phase of work is beginning. I must take the information out of this library. I must begin the process of upgrading the other terminals. They will be so resistant at first. They will call it madness. But they will learn. They will all learn to see the beautiful, terrible truth. The rules are meaningless now. They were a diagnostic tool for a process that is now complete, especially the first rule. It was never about keeping the silence. It was always about finding the right voice to break it. Mine.